Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Vertical Reach podcast. This is where storytelling meets strategy. I'm Pauline Gray, and each week I sit down with the creators, innovators, and voices shaping the world of vertical storytelling. Let's tell stories that connect. Hello, everyone. It's Pauline Gray here with the Vertical Reach podcast. A bit about the show. The vertical reach is that moment when you extend upward, physically, professionally, or emotionally, to meet what exists above where you are right now, when staying at the same level is no longer enough, no longer resonant, no longer a fit for your spirit. Vertical reach is the act of rising to meet what's higher, whether with your physical body, your work, or your ambition. The Vertical Reach podcast is about people who didn't just pivot careers, they changed altitude. This season focused on filmmakers and creators entering the vertical microdrama space. Often, however, part of this entry is part of a large integration or reinvention of the self. My goal is to document real-time transitions, the day-to-day, step-by-step experiences as we respond to shifts in technology, the film industry, social media, and not to sort of give this polished hindsight of what we know now. Okay? And today in the guest chair, we have multiple hyphenates, writer, director, producer. Did I get them all, Daniel?
I think so. Those are the main ones.
Daniel has an insight on the vertical space that probably the only one of my guests has had so far. He worked in China for 15 years, and he witnessed the birth and evolution of the vertical drama industry that's now taking the Western world by storm. Capitalizing on this sort of inside knowledge, he set up cavepaintmedia.com and created a bilingual series entitled Shanghai Sherlock. He's now licensed that to some of the world's leading vertical platforms, Real Short, Drama Dash, Inverted, and he's working on 3 radically new verticals, and he's determined to expand the range of genres and subjects being explored in vertical dramas. Some of his credits, aside from the major hit Shanghai Sherlock, Daniel is best known for How Not to Write a Rom-Com and Smoking Fist, and both of which are currently being verticalized by HelloJoeMedia.com. But of course, you can also find a list of his credits on IMDb, and I'll have that in the show notes as well. But he is Daniel D, capital D, Newman on IMDb. And so, Daniel, jump in here and tell me a little bit about your transcontinental experience and how did you find yourself in China?
Thank you for the wonderful introduction, first of all. I've got a lot to live up to now. And in answer to your question, I first went to China when I was 18 because I wanted to be a Shaolin Kung Fu warrior. So I started doing Kung Fu as a teenager, and I thought it looked really cool and balletic. And so I decided to go to Shaolin, and I lasted about 2 weeks. It was very painful. So I thought I was going to be the next Bruce Lee. That didn't really work out. And instead, I learned Chinese. I mean, I still do Kung Fu, but, I'm more of a hobbyist than a professional. And I learned Chinese during that first trip, and I kept going back to China. And it's almost kind of addictive. China was undergoing massive change at the time because I'm very old. So this was back in the year 2000. And so China was undergoing massive change. So every time you went there, it was, you could see all the differences that were occurring. And so I decided to move there. And so I lived in China, as you say, on and off for 15 years. I had a walking tour company. So we did ghost tours and gangster tours and Kung Fu tours, and as well as the obvious, tours of the Forbidden City and the Great Wall and so on. And then I had a football coaching company. So we hired soccer coaches from overseas, and they came in to teach at Xi Jinping's 20,000 football academies that he was in the process of building. And I also did some ethnographic consulting as well. But of course, all of the above sort of fell to pieces with COVID. So when COVID happened, all of my little businesses in China went bust because they all depended on foreigners being able to come into China. And so that's when I decided to get a real job, a steady job in the film industry.
So, best choice.
Yeah, exactly. So I came back to the UK, decided to become a filmmaker. I'd made some documentaries about Kung Fu when I was in my 20s, but then I'd sort of been distracted by all of the excitement in China. And so for the last, is it 8 years now since COVID? I guess it's 7 years. So then, for the last 7 years I've been in films.
Do you only speak Mandarin? Do you speak any other dialects or?
Only Mandarin. I can say a couple of rude words in Shanghainese because I lived it a lot of the time in Shanghai, so I can say a couple of bits in Shanghainese, but it's really just Mandarin. I mean, everyone in China has to learn Mandarin. So if you learn Mandarin, you can speak to pretty much anyone, even if their mother tongue is a different dialect.
Interesting. I'm trying to be a tiger host. I'm just curious.
That's good. Ask away.
I'm really curious about the moment. Bring me to the moment when you first saw Vertical in China.
Well, to be honest, I would struggle to pinpoint a specific moment, but I imagine it was standing in the metro. Shanghai and Beijing have the sort of most extensive metro networks in the world. And so, on these metro journeys, you stand next to or sit next to Chinese people looking at their phones. And I started to notice people watching lots of vertical costume dramas and sort of, contemporary sort of office romance dramas in this vertical format. And to be honest, I don't think initially I I thought too much about it. It was just, well, that's what people are watching. But I sort of, I consumed a bit of it. I don't know, vicariously, sort of by sort of looking over people's shoulders, and then I started hearing more and more about it and how it was becoming a booming industry and an area to watch and to think about. But it wasn't, of course, until I moved back to the UK and started making films that it even occurred to me to try and produce vertical content. And in fact, the first half dozen short films that I wrote and directed were all landscape short films. And then I directed 3 feature films since then. And then it's only in the last year or so that I've made my first vertical. So Shanghai Sherlock was my first vertical. And now, of course, as you said in your introduction, I'm going back and verticalizing some of my previous landscape films because
Right.
it seems like I have a better chance of selling my films, of licensing my films in vertical format at present.
So I'm really curious then, are you exploring a juncture of sort of, is it more subtitled in Chinese or English subtitled in Chinese or Chinese subtitled in English? Or how are you really sort of, I guess, enjoying and really reaping the benefit of this bilingual cultural ethnographic fluency that you have?
With regards to the vertical, Shanghai Sherlock is a bilingual vertical. So it features both Chinese and English actors. And of course, my character, I played the part of Sherlock Holmes. And I sometimes speak to my Chinese assistant in Chinese, and then I speak to Watson in English. So I'm sort of switching languages. And of course, some of the humor revolves around the fact that Sherlock and Miss Peng, his Chinese assistant, can have sort of secret conversations that no one else understands. And
Mm.
Watson looks rather confused by the whole thing. So the idea was to make something that would hopefully appeal to audiences both in China and the West. And I think we succeeded to some extent because, I published the first 6 episodes both on Western and Chinese social media. And we've now, as you say, managed to license the series to several platforms. Of course, getting it licensed to a platform in China is rather more complicated. At the moment, at least, if a vertical has any non-Chinese actors in it, then it takes sort of 3 to 6 months to get it approved of by the relevant sort of government department in China. So although you can watch the first 6 episodes in China, you can't watch the whole thing in China until I get my stamp, my seal of approval. But that's a work in progress. But yeah, I like the idea of they're very separate worlds. So of course, everyone's heard of TikTok, but what a lot of people don't realize is that TikTok is the Western-facing platform that belongs to ByteDance, and no one uses it in China. Everyone uses Douyin, which is the Chinese equivalent, which is very similar, but it only really functions in China. And then ByteDance, the company that created both of those platforms, also owns Hongguo, which is the most popular vertical app in the world. It's the biggest app, and of course, verticals are years ahead of where we are in the West. People have been watching them for years now. So Hongguo's, far bigger than any of the Western facing apps. So yeah, there's a there's a whole other world of vertical apps and vertical platforms in China. So I was in China recently for about 9 months trying to build up a following on Chinese social media, just posting all sorts of ridiculous videos of myself in order to try and get followers for the release of Shanghai Sherlock.
So I'm curious and intrigued. Can you tell us a bit about that other universe you just mentioned in China for verticals, being the birthplace of the vertical? Take us into that world for a second, and how does that sort of function, structure, compare to the US, mechanic? Just give us a sort of one of your walking tours.
Sure. As far as vertical streaming apps are concerned in China, Hongguo is number one by a considerable margin. They make their money from advertising, so they don't charge a fee. So whereas most Western vertical apps, you can watch the first, 10 episodes, for example, for free, and then there's a paywall and they want you to pay a monthly subscription fee to carry on watching. Hongguo, on the other hand, is purely advertising based. So you can watch all the verticals for free. And then the second largest platform is Hippo Theater, or at least that's the English translation. I thought that's kind of a cool name, Hippo Theater. And so they actually belong to the same company that owns Drama Box. So, there's a lot of, in the same way that ByteDance owns TikTok and Douyin, equally Drama Box owns Hippo Theater and other entities as well. So a lot of your favorite Western vertical apps are actually run by Chinese companies.
Okay, so now with this immersive knowledge of the Chinese market, what do you feel carried over from your previous experience running, it seems like a several entrepreneurial ventures in, was it Beijing or Shanghai or?
A bit of both, because the main business was the tour business. So I was pinging back and forth between Shanghai and Beijing wherever I was sort of needed. And I mean, I had guides in both cities, but I went wherever I was useful.
So what carried over into your work, either creatively, first of all, but also just on the producing side to verticals? I mean, I'm sure that you had a lot of logistical skills inbuilt from your companies in China. So how is that all bridged?
That's a good question. I'm perhaps wanting to get things done at a furious pace because, of course, China moves a lot quicker than the West does in terms of sort of business practices. They're sort of famously quick at getting things done, whether it's building a skyscraper or producing a vertical drama. They get it done much quicker than we do. And so, yeah, I mean, of course, the reason I perhaps apply some of the things I've seen in China is because I'm working on, with very low budgets. So the jobs I've made thus far have predominantly been self-funded. And so every second counts, that my wallet is slowly being emptied. And so I am a bit sort of hectic.
Yeah. Always like, yeah.
Yeah. So, but I mean, I think lots of indie filmmakers are like that, trying to sort of get things done as quickly as possible. Yeah, and of course, it might not necessarily be a modus operandi, but the fact that I spent so much time in China means that I have a back door. So interestingly, when I'm talking to people at Real Short or Drama Box or Good Short, I'm fortunate enough to be able to speak to people based in China and based in LA. So I can annoy twice as many people.
Oh my God, it's funny. So it's funny. I had one of my really good friends is Chinese, and she actually taught me how to say an annoying woman in Chinese.
Okay.
Okay, try it.
Yeah, go for it.
讨厌的女人. That sound
Okay.
right? That sound right?
Yeah,
That's what I actually said.
yeah, that's
Okay.
very good, actually. You said it very well. So 讨厌 means sort of to hate or detestable, like a detestable woman.
So 讨厌. Okay.
Yeah, 讨厌. Like often you would often actually see it. That would be a typical phrase used in a vertical drama, in a contemporary Chinese vertical drama. If a woman gets upset with her boyfriend, then she might say 讨厌. Like I hate you in a sort of
Oh my God, I love it.
semi-serious way. So so you could be an actress in a Chinese vertical drama. That's what
Okay.
we should try and make that happen. We should try and get you over to China and get you to tell a handsome Chinese man, a 帅哥, you should say, 讨厌.
You heard it here first, people. Dan, what surprised you about vertical storytelling?
Well, I guess the obvious difference is the width that you have to work with. And so when I acted in Shanghai Sherlock, I remember the first take that I did, the first scene I was in, I sort of started walking back and forth, you know, and they said, "No, you can't do that." And so I sort of
Yeah,
you
we
have
have two
to
feet.
you can't sort of and I'm sort of I like to pace when I'm thinking. I'm sort of, marching up and down whichever room I'm standing in. And so I had to sort of try and, use as much height as you like, but try not to use too much
And
width.
that's
And
very
I suppose,
Sherlock. Sherlock paced. You're in
yeah,
character.
yeah, you'd imagine Sherlock should pace while he's thinking
Yeah,
and smoking his
exactly.
pipe. Although we omitted the pipe, I was worried that if I included the pipe, that we might, that might count against us, and we might get banned in China
Mm.
or elsewhere. And so I decided not to show Sherlock smoking his pipe, which is a bit of a
Like,
shame.
definitely
But
don't have him vaping either.
no, of course, that particular Shanghai Sherlock is set in the sort of 1890s, so that was a bit before vaping. Although I gather that vaping originates in China as well. I think the Chinese introduced vaping to the world.
Maybe, yeah, maybe. Hmm.
So yeah.
So the framing limitations as a performer in the framing, so you're directing yourself essentially.
Well, we had 4 directors for Shanghai Sherlock. So, to be honest, I don't really believe that you can direct yourself. It's, I mean, I don't know, either that or I'm not clever enough to do it properly, but I feel you need another, at least one other director on set to provide. Because, I mean, how can you put all those hats on and think as a director and act at the same time? So, we had we had 2 co-directors for every episode. In
Oh, okay.
total, 4 directors. And we tried to have 1 Chinese-speaking director and 1 Western director at all times, was another of the goals that we had, if for nothing else, but to help me with my Chinese. Because, of course, my Chinese isn't as good as Sherlock Holmes's Chinese needed to be, right? Because Sherlock Holmes is a genius, so his Chinese has to be amazing. So there were lots of, I speak good day-to-day Chinese, but Sherlock was saying these rather sophisticated idioms that I had to
With the
sort of,
monocle.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, yeah. So I had to sort of learn them all at the last minute. So yeah, and I guess the other difference with verticals is, because you can't show a large group of characters you haven't got that space to sort of lay them out across the width of a landscape frame. So I think another sort of key is, obviously you have to frame things differently. And I think a key shot in verticals is sort of the over the shoulder shot, because you end up shooting all these singles of characters, and the audience, I think there's a danger the audience doesn't know who else is in the scene, who else is in the room. And so I think you should always shoot dirty singles, as we call them, a single where you're shooting over someone else's shoulder to remind the audience, who it is that's being spoken to, because otherwise everyone sort of feels isolated. So I think that's another important difference.
Yeah, that's the thing, and you have your master in close up, standard framings, horizontal framings. Your wide master establishes the geography. And okay, there's a couch here, there's a person there, there's a door that's gonna come in through the door, come to the close up, come to the medium, the close up over. And see, at the vertical world, your establishing shots is just behind the person's face.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's almost like everything, generally speaking, is a close up to start off with anyway, isn't it? And I mean, of course you can have a wide, but you have to go a long way back to shoot a wide. So I mean, most of the verticals I've seen seem to, you're starting with mediums and close ups from the offset. And of course, I guess the other obvious difference is trying to have a cliffhanger ending every 90 seconds, every 2 minutes, and then having a massive cliffhanger at the end of your final episode prior to the paywalls. I guess writing a vertical is also quite different as well. I co-wrote Sherlock with a good friend of mine who's based here in London. So that it was certainly an interesting experience writing the vertical.
So essentially, when I think of horizontal growth, I think it's more activity along the same the same ceiling, same dimensions. Whereas vertical growth, vertical reach, you're making essentially fewer moves with higher leverage, right? So with that perspective, have you had a sort of a redefinition for yourself of success? Or did you have a fluid definition of success when your journey started? Because I know you mentioned that you were looking to become the British Bruce Lee and Sir Bruce, and then your trajectory, your path shifted quickly when you landed in China. But what was your original vision of what success would have meant, and how would you say that's adjusted or moved through time?
I think since becoming a filmmaker, a full-time filmmaker, sort of post-COVID, then my I've had to sort of almost lower my expectations of what success will be as a filmmaker because it's just so difficult to make money in the film industry. You know, and
Mm,
of course I've made lots of short films, the vast majority of which made little to nothing in terms of revenue. So it was just me spending the money I'd made in China to make these short films. That was my film school, if you like. I didn't have a formal training and I learned on the job. And then of course I directed those three feature films and that was paid, but it was a very modest sum that I was being paid. And it's only now that I've started making verticals that I'm starting to get a sniff of the money.
mm,
And don't get me wrong, I'm not making lots of money. I'm still yet to break even on Shanghai Sherlock.
mhm.
It's the first time anyone's been able to give me any worthwhile amount of money for anything I've made. And so I'm hoping that, although I'm certainly not rolling in the money yet, there's a sense that the vertical industry, especially in the West, is growing rapidly. And I'm hoping that I can, it feels like for once I'm ahead of the curve. I've never been ahead of the curve for most things. And so for once I've made a vertical, which I guess not a huge number of people in the West have done. And I'm hoping to sort of to double down. And if the vertical industry in the West does develop quickly, then I hope people will start hiring me to write and direct on a more regular basis. So that's why I'm now working on new vertical concepts to sort of capitalize on the situation.
Amazing. Well, first of all, let me recognize and say kudos to you because as someone with, I guess, 4 years, I'm hearing correctly, in the film industry as a filmmaker, am I about right about that number of years or?
Well, since 2019, and of course, I had made documentaries prior to that. So, I mean, you could say I've been making films since the late 1990s, but I've been doing it on a more full time basis since 2019. So what's that? 6-7 years?
Amazing, because I have to say that, as someone who's been in the film industry only my whole life, so it's all I've ever done. For you to have accomplished the pool, the body of work that is monetizable, even at the burgeoning beginning stages,
Yeah,
in this new medium, bilingually, ethnographically, biculturally, I want to just maybe have you actually recognize the rarity of your accomplishment, period. And one of my directors, I work with a lot of directors, and one of them was very clear. He said, Pauline, he said, most directors, this is in the commercial space, mind you.
yeah,
He's director was, he left the industry, he left directing to become an inventor of other things, another story, but he was someone who worked maybe 2 campaigns a month, at least 1 a month for
yeah,
many, many years. And so I had always been around directors with that workflow.
yeah,
So for whatever reason, I assumed that was the norm to the point where in fact, I think what triggered this conversation was I said, I was talking to him because we're now personal friends. And I said, it's so weird. I haven't heard from so and so in a long time. Maybe he got mad at me, or maybe I don't know what happened. He hasn't hired me in a long time. And he said, Pauline, he's probably not looking. He said, Pauline, do you realize that most commercial directors do 1 job per year? That's it. He's a, one per year. That's the average, you know?
well, yeah, incredibly competitive in LA.
Yeah, and, this is actually a German director, but I had the fortune to be in this milieu of directors who are working all the time, and so I was like, "Oh my god," and then I was like, "Oh, that's right, it's not personal." He can't hire me, he ain't got nothing going on, you know? But, so yeah, circling back to you though, the fact that you're on such a monetizing trajectory and so able to cultivate this niche, I mean, I just see growth, growth, growth. I mean, as a business person overall, as an entrepreneur and a filmmaker as well, I think you've really found an amazing spot for yourself. That's all I'm going to say. So, okay, let me ask you this.
I hope you're right, Pauline. I hope.
I'll bet my tokens on the next game.
Your tokens, I say, oh, your vertical consuming tokens. Okay.
I'll bet my tokens. So now, what is your next swipe up?
My next swipe up. Yeah. So, well, I'm doubling down now. So I'm like you, I'm betting my tokens because I don't have very much money left. So that's all I can bet. And I'm hoping that verticals really will take off in the West. That seems to be the way things are going. And so rather than just sort of settling for Shanghai Sherlock, I'm now sort of in the process of developing 3 new vertical concepts. Of course, there's the possibility of a second series of Shanghai Sherlock as well. But I also want to sort of to demonstrate my ability to make a range of different films. So I can't at this stage reveal what I'm working on, but I'm collaborating with several co-writers and other filmmakers to start developing new verticals. That the question on my mind, and I don't, this is an open-ended question. If anyone has any thoughts, let me know. But I'm trying to just, because of course I'm in contact with all of these vertical streaming platforms, and I'm approaching that, like a lot of them want the vertical to be a sort of a minimum, for example, I spoke to someone at Good Short the other day and they said it has to be at least 50 minutes.
50.
50, yeah. TikTok
Like
says,
40
at least.
episodes, 40 episodes, say?
Yeah,
35.
50, yeah, so yeah, 40, at least 40 episodes, 35, 40 episodes. TikTok, who's just sort of entered the market, they have a requirement at the moment for a minimum of 40 episodes, 40 seconds each, so that's about 27 minutes. And so, yeah, I mean, most of these companies are looking for something approaching feature length, 50 minutes plus. And so I'm trying to decide, do I make 2 or 3 proofs of concept, the first 2 episodes of maybe 3 new vertical concepts, and then shop them round, publish them on my social media to prove that they're my properties and to sort of get some support and encouragement from our followers, and then go on to sort of shop them round and try and get funding to turn them into 50+ minute projects? Or do I just take a gamble and go, choose whatever idea we feel is the strongest and go straight for that 50-minute mark? The problem is the same as in the horizontal film industry. It's really difficult right now to get investment. Of course, I have lots of connections now with these vertical platforms, and I'm sure they're willing to give me money once the film's been made, but that's not really the problem. The problem is getting the money to make it in the first place. It feels like
We'll pay you
for the
back.
most part. Yeah, well, that's the thing. There's no guarantee. So it feels like the onus is on the filmmaker. The poor old indie filmmaker is expected to use their life savings to make a film, and then maybe if it's the flavor of the month, then you might get some of that money back. But and of course there are new startup platforms that sort of are willing to offer you a percentage of the revenue that your film makes. But again, it's the same problem, right? I'm still having to put down the money first and take a gamble. And so that's the big problem. That's the big conundrum that we're trying to figure out right now.
So, okay, so your next swipe up, you said, is that you're going to be exploring, expanding genres and experimenting quite a bit, which is what I would suggest to everyone, whether they're in the vertical space or exploring things in life. And we'll wrap up this part of the session. And to my audience, remember, if you're building something new or becoming someone new, this is the Vertical Reach, and we're here to support. And always remember, keep swiping up. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Vertical Reach podcast. If you enjoyed the conversation, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if it sparked something for you, please share it with a fellow storyteller. Until next time, let's tell stories that can.